The air crackled with tension, a palpable energy that seemed to electrify the very walls of the room. Inside the Oval Office, two world leaders faced off, their expressions a mix of determination and barely concealed animosity. On one side stood Donald Trump, the former reality TV star turned political titan, a man whose very presence commanded attention and controversy. He was back in the White House, eager to reclaim his position on the world stage, his ambitions as grand as ever. Across from him sat Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the Ukrainian president who had become a global symbol of defiance against Russian aggression, his resolve unyielding. A high-stakes deal was on the table, one that promised to reshape the geopolitical landscape and redefine alliances. But beneath the surface, old resentments and simmering tensions threatened to derail the negotiations before they even began, a powder keg waiting for a spark. This was not just a meeting of minds, it was a clash of egos, a battle of wills with the fate of the world hanging in the balance, a modern-day duel in the heart of American power. The Oval Office, a room steeped in history and power, had rarely seen such a raw display of animosity, its walls echoing with the weight of the moment. The proposed minerals deal, a complex agreement that promised the United States access to Ukrainian oil, gas, and rare minerals, was supposed to be the centerpiece of the meeting, a beacon of mutual benefit. It was touted as a win-win for both nations, economic prosperity for Ukraine and energy security for the United States, a partnership that could redefine their futures. But the deal was also a gamble, a high-wire act with potentially catastrophic consequences, a tightrope walk over a chasm of uncertainty. It was a deal with the devil, some whispered, a Faustian bargain that could draw the United States deeper into the quagmire of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a perilous path fraught with danger. The meeting was supposed to be a photo op, a chance for Trump to showcase his deal-making prowess, and for Zelenskyy to secure much-needed support for his war-torn nation, a moment of triumph for both leaders. Instead, it descended into chaos, a diplomatic train wreck broadcast on the world stage, a spectacle of discord and disarray. The cameras captured every grimace, every eye roll, every icy glare, immortalizing the tension and animosity for all to see. The tension in the room was palpable, a suffocating blanket of animosity that threatened to smother any hope of a productive dialogue, a heavy fog of distrust and hostility. The world watched with bated breath as the two alpha males circled each other, their words dripping with venom, their postures rigid with defiance. The stakes were higher than ever, the potential consequences too dire to contemplate, a precarious balance on the edge of a knife. The future, it seemed, hung by a thread, and that thread was about to snap, a fragile line between order and chaos, peace and conflict. The relationship between Trump and Zelenskyy had always been strained, a volatile mix of mutual admiration and deep-seated mistrust. From the very beginning, their interactions were marked by a palpable tension, a sense that both leaders were constantly weighing their words and actions, unsure of how the other would react. Trump, the self-proclaimed master negotiator, saw Zelenskyy as a novice, someone who had yet to earn his stripes on the global stage. He often approached their discussions with a sense of superiority, believing that his years of experience in business and politics gave him the upper hand, a former comedian punching above his weight class on the world stage. Zelenskyy, on the other hand, was acutely aware of his unconventional path to the presidency. He knew that many, including Trump, viewed his background in entertainment as a liability rather than an asset. Zelenskyy, in turn, viewed Trump as a loose cannon, an unpredictable force of nature who could just as easily be an ally as an adversary. This unpredictability made it difficult for Zelenskyy to fully trust Trump, always wondering if the next move would be in his favor or against him. An unpredictable force of nature who could just as easily be an ally as an adversary. This dynamic created a constant undercurrent of tension, with both leaders trying to navigate a relationship fraught with potential pitfalls. Their history was littered with landmines. Every interaction, every phone call, every meeting was a potential flashpoint, a moment that could either bring them closer together or drive them further apart. There was the infamous phone call in 2019, the one that led to Trump's first impeachment. This call, which was supposed to be a routine discussion, quickly spiraled into a major political scandal, the one that led to Trump's first impeachment. The call revealed Trump's attempts to pressure Zelenskyy into investigating his political rival, Joe Biden, a move that was seen by many as an abuse of power. Trump's attempts to pressure Zelenskyy into investigating his political rival, Joe Biden, had left a bitter taste in the mouths of many Ukrainians. They saw it as a blatant attempt to interfere in their country's politics for personal gain. Had left a bitter taste in the mouths of many Ukrainians. The fact that Trump had withheld military aid to Ukraine at the same time only added fuel to the fire. This aid was crucial for Ukraine's defense against Russian aggression, and its suspension was seen as a betrayal. The fact that Trump had withheld military aid to Ukraine at the same time only added fuel to the fire. This decision was not just a political maneuver, it had real tangible consequences for the people of Ukraine, who were left to fend for themselves against a formidable adversary. Then there was the issue of Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin. Trump's apparent reluctance to criticize the Russian leader raised eyebrows not just in Kiev but around the world. Trump had always been reluctant to criticize the Russian leader, even as Putin's forces encroached further into Ukrainian territory. This reluctance was often interpreted as a sign of weakness, or worse, complicity. Even as Putin's forces encroached further into Ukrainian territory. This encroachment was not just a geopolitical issue. It was a direct threat to Ukraine's sovereignty and security. Some saw this as a sign of weakness, others as a calculated attempt to avoid escalating the conflict. Regardless of the interpretation, the result was the same: a growing sense of unease and distrust in Kiev. Others as a calculated attempt to avoid escalating the conflict. This ambiguity in Trump's stance made it difficult for Zelenskyy and his advisors to formulate a coherent strategy, always second-guessing whether they could count on American support. Whatever the reason, Trump's apparent soft spot for Putin did little to inspire confidence in Kyiv. The Ukrainian leadership found themselves in a precarious position, trying to balance their need for American support with their distrust of Trump's intentions. Against this backdrop of mistrust and suspicion, the minerals deal was always going to be a tough sell. The deal, which had the potential to bring significant economic benefits to both countries, was overshadowed by the political tensions between their leaders. It was a high-risk, high-reward proposition, one that could either cement a strategic alliance or blow up in both their faces. The stakes were incredibly high, and both leaders knew that a single misstep could have far-reaching consequences, one that could either cement a strategic alliance or blow up in both their faces. The potential rewards were immense, but so were the risks, and neither leader could afford to ignore the precariousness of their situation. In the end, it was the weight of history, the burden of past grievances, that proved too much to overcome. The long-standing issues and mistrust between the two countries created an insurmountable barrier, the burden of past grievances, that proved too much to overcome. Despite the potential for a mutually beneficial partnership, the shadows of the past loomed too large, preventing any real progress from being made. The Oval Office was packed. It was a scene of organized chaos, with people jostling for space and position, each one acutely aware of the gravity of the moment. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to vibrate through the room. Aides and advisors crammed themselves into the room, their faces betraying a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. They whispered among themselves, exchanging hurried, anxious glances, each one trying to gauge the mood of the others. The stakes were high and everyone knew it. The mood was tense, the silence broken only by the nervous shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash of wills that was about to unfold. The tension was almost unbearable, a silent pressure that weighed heavily on everyone present. All eyes were on the two men at the center of it all. Trump, his face a mask of barely concealed impatience, and Zelenskyy, his expression a study in stoic determination. The contrast between them was stark, a visual representation of the larger geopolitical struggle playing out in that room. The meeting began cordially enough with the usual pleasantries and platitudes. There were handshakes and smiles, but they were perfunctory, lacking genuine warmth. It was a dance of diplomacy, each side carefully measuring their words and actions. But the veneer of civility was thin, and it didn't take long for the cracks to appear. The polite smiles began to fade, replaced by furrowed brows and tightened lips. The room seemed to grow colder, the atmosphere more charged with each passing moment. Trump, never one for small talk, quickly steered the conversation towards the minerals deal. His voice was loud and commanding, filling the room with a sense of urgency. He laid out his demands with characteristic bluntness, leaving little room for negotiation. He spoke in his usual rambling, stream-of-consciousness style, his words a dizzying mix of boasts, threats, and non-sequiturs. His hands moved animatedly, punctuating his speech with wild gestures. It was a performance designed to overwhelm and dominate. Zelenskyy listened patiently, his face betraying little emotion. He was a picture of calm, but those who knew him well could see the tension in his eyes. He was weighing his options, calculating his responses, trying to find a way to navigate the minefield laid out before him. But beneath the calm exterior, a storm was brewing. He had come prepared, armed with facts and figures, ready to make his case. He knew the importance of this meeting, not just for his country, but for his own political survival. He had come to Washington seeking support, not lectures. He needed allies, not adversaries. The future of his nation depended on the outcome of this meeting, and he was determined to leave no stone unturned in his quest for aid. He had risked everything to be here, flying halfway across the world while his country was still at war. The images of the conflict were fresh in his mind, a constant reminder of the stakes. He carried the weight of his people's hopes and fears on his shoulders. As Trump continued to hold court, Zelenskyy's patience began to wear thin. The endless monologue, the self-aggrandizing rhetoric, it was all too familiar. He had hoped for a meaningful dialogue, but it was becoming clear that this was not going to be that kind of meeting. He had heard it all before. The empty promises, the veiled threats, the self-serving pronouncements disguised as grand strategy. It was disheartening, but he knew he couldn't afford to show his frustration. He had to stay focused, to keep pushing for what his country needed. The discussion grew more heated, voices were raised, and the atmosphere became increasingly charged. The contentious nature of the meeting was evident to all present. The expected deal for access to Ukrainian rare earth and critical minerals hung in the balance, with both sides unwilling to back down. The tension reached a breaking point, leading to the abrupt cancellation of the scheduled news conference. The uncertainty of future negotiations loomed large, leaving everyone to wonder what the next steps would be in this high-stakes geopolitical chess game.